Hello, and welcome to another monthly wrap up. So, my reading month has been extremely slow. The only reason I even have as many books to talk about this time is because I finished one on October 1st. There's another one that's just like a picture book essentially, and then another one that's a graphic novel. So, I wasn't exactly really reading full length novels here this month, which sucks because it was October, and so you'd think, like, since I'm so into horror books and everything, this would be my month. But my fibromyalgia didn't really allow that. It's been a bit rough. So it kind of is what it is, I guess. If you don't feel up to reading, then you can't really do it. Also, since like last week, there's been construction happening right above us, and it is extremely loud. However, it's kind of like the lunch break time right now, so I'm kind of hoping I can get through this before everything starts back up, but if you hear some weird noises, that's definitely what it is. So let's jump right in with the first book, which is Watch Over Me by Nina LaCour. This came out last year in 2020. It's a YA paranormal contemporary, and I gave this 4.5 stars. So this book is pretty much about this orphan girl where when she turns 18, she gets this job as a school teacher on this farm. The people that own this farm, it's like this really big family where they're just kind of like constantly fostering children and adopting them and just bringing them into their home. And they even have a schoolhouse on their property, so that's kind of where she works. And however, once she gets there, she instantly knows that things aren't exactly what they seem because there are ghostly figures that dance in the fields at night. So this was my first time reading from this author. I've heard a few other people talking about this book. Nina LaCour's writing is really cozy, and the book itself felt comforting. Like, it's such a quick read, but it just felt like such a comfort, like a nice warm drink or like warm soup or something, like I don't know. But this book pretty much gets right into it. There's not a lot of fluff around the story, which I really appreciate. However, not much actually happens in this as it's very heavily character focused, so most of the time is spent in the characters' heads. However, I really enjoyed reading about the family she works for as they're just like so sweet and supportive, and it was like, damn, like I wish I could be a part of something like that. But this was just a nice, cozy, beautiful, haunting read and just very quick to go through. I really enjoyed it, and I think it was just exactly what I needed at that moment. These next two books are e-arcs that I received through NetGalley. This first one is I Will Not Die Alone by Dira White and illustrated by Joe Bennett. This just came out on November 2nd. It is an adult graphic novel kind of deal, and I give it 4 stars. So this is essentially a picture book of affirmations, but with a twist as there's an overarching story to all of it. The art is really like humorous and colorful, where the text itself ranges from like silly to really serious. I can definitely see myself rereading this several times because paying attention to how the art fits in with the text is really important. And so even though this book like literally just takes a few minutes to get through, as it's just like one of those coffee table type books, you can definitely spend more time with it and kind of like analyzing the meanings and just kind of connecting all the dots. But this is definitely one that I can see myself going back to. Next is Ékleipsis, The Abyss by Tamel Wino. I'm not really sure how to pronounce that last name there. I apologize. This just came out October 29th. It is just a straight up horror book, and I gave it 3 stars. So this is a collection of 6 horror stories that all take place in reality. It's essentially about how shitty humans can be to each other. So some of the scenarios feel extremely real. When I did my review for this, I kind of did a snippet of each story, so I'm kind of gonna do that here as well. The first short story is called Marlene, and it's the one that feels the most based in reality. The story itself does feel counterintuitive, like the motivations behind it is kind of like, what? But I think it sets the tone of the entire book very well. Next is No Place Like Home, and this is one that is centered around vlogging, and you can really feel like the manufactured happiness from the family in the beginning. It's really interesting perspective. However, the husband's actions in this one really bothered me because at first he's a lot more wary than normal horror story main characters are, and so that felt really refreshing and nice at first. But then it's just like, call the police. Like, just fucking call the police. Why don't you do this simple thing? So it just kind of lost me, and how unbelievable the character ended up acting with the whole situation, and it was just frustrating. Next is my favorite in this collection, and it's called Unprise. The tension and anxiety were just really spot on, and you couldn't exactly predict the character's next moves, which is always nice. There was one scene where the main character of this one was just acting completely dumb and could have saved herself way sooner. It really didn't make sense to me how it was portrayed, but the whole like thinking on your feet to save yourself kind of concept was really well done here. And there was one instance where it said the time was about midnight, and then like 2 hours later it said it was about midnight again. So that's just a little error that I noticed that I assume will be fixed in the final copy, but we'll see, I guess. Next is All Day and a Night, and the characters in this one are all male, so these stories aren't just about like women being victimized, which I would have had a problem with if that was the case. The setting in this one really makes the story. It's pretty fantastic. And also there's a character in this where his accent is kind of like written in how he says the words, and I can like hear the accent really well through the writing, and I thought that was pretty awesome. Also, a bit of a content warning for this one, there is talk of police brutality, so be aware of that. This next one was my least favorite, and it's called Blue Devils. The writing of this one just felt completely different from the rest of the stories. It literally just felt like someone else wrote it. It just wasn't well done, and content warning for sexual assault as well. Lastly, we have The Descent, which is the least predictable of the bunch. The horror doesn't really come in until the end, but it's done in a very effective way. Overall though, I enjoyed the author's writing and how they could convey like a character's personality and their life just so quickly in these short stories with such a short amount of time. My enjoyment of these stories varied quite a lot though, so I guess you can say that there's something for everyone here, but that's why I ended up settling on a 3, because I just ended up with both ends of the spectrum here. Next we have Uzumaki by Junji Ito, which came out all the way back in 2000. This is a horror graphic novel, and I also gave this 3 stars. If the frame's a little bit different, it's because my phone was full and I had to delete some stuff. So anyway, This graphic novel consists of 20 chapters where they all take place in the same town, and it's kind of the same 2 main characters, but there's a huge supporting cast that the stories are about. Some of the chapters lead into each other while others are a lot more episodic, but the entirety kind of deals with this spiral curse. So Junji Ito is known for his body horror, and once again, that's what shines here. You can immediately see how detailed the art is, and it's really neat because it can go from being really beautiful in one panel to just like very grotesque in the next. And I also really enjoyed how he incorporates the whole spiral thing into everything. However, the downside to this is the characters felt really bland. They never really developed a personality, and I wanted to care about them and like their fates, but I just really couldn't care at all. We also don't really receive a solid explanation for what's happening at the end, so it just kind of ends, and it's like, okay, I guess that's it. So those are kind of the things that brought it down to just a 3 for me, but I kind of feel like that's how I felt about most Junji Ito stuff, is it's just the art that shines, where the story is kind of just meh and very, secondary to everything else. Lastly, we have a book that I read for the local book club that I'm in, and that is Lafayette in the Somewhat United States by Sarah Vowell. This came out in 2015. It is nonfiction, and I gave it 3.5 stars. So this is essentially a recount of the American Revolution, but with a main focus on what France did to help America. Obviously, as an American, I learned about the revolution in school. However, the people that helped us were pretty much just kind of mentioned in passing and not really delved into it all, so I pretty much didn't hear of like Lafayette or anyone like that until I was an adult. This is supposed to be a more humorous book, however, it didn't really feel like that to me. The author's humor is very dry and more just like harsh truths than like trying to be funny, so it was just kind of like a heh thing instead of it actually being more entertaining. This also isn't portrayed in chronological order, so there's a lot of flip-flopping back and forth between years, so sometimes I found it difficult to know what like year I was in, especially if it was just talking about a month at the time. And also at times it felt like she was just kind of listing events, and that made it kind of dull as well, as there were times where I felt I really wasn't absorbing what I was reading on the page. What I found the most interesting about this book is she talks about the traveling she had to do for her research for this, where she visited like colonial towns and Paris and places like that. And that was the most interesting because she always encountered people to talk to about the history, and I just found that a lot more fascinating than just like listing the facts. However, I did think this book did a good job of portraying like all these memorable figures that we've heard of, like George Washington, for example, in a different light that we don't really see. Because like when I think of George Washington, everyone thinks of like the presidential version of him and not necessarily the American Revolution portrayal of him. And Lafayette came to America when he was only 19 years old, and you just kind of don't realize how young everyone was for the revolution. So I thought this really did a good job of kind of showing their age and their naivety and things like that. So I did learn quite a lot in the end. And unfortunately, that's all for October. Like I said, it was a very weird reading month. Not much horror, really, just the one e-arc, but wow. Yeah, that's probably the least amount of horror I've read all year, and of course it was in October. Yeah. Anyway, thank you for hanging out with me. It is always appreciated, and until next time, bonne journée and au revoir.